Good evening. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Good evening, everyone, both here and online. So we have these two cameras and we are actually live streaming this event. So if you would want to rewatch it, please drop me an email and I will also be able to send you the recording. So thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us tonight for an evening with Anna, Katherine, and Elena. I'm going to pass the, I'm Denis Stolyrov. I'm an assistant curator here at Pushkin House. We are happy to welcome our speakers who have traveled a long, long way to be here with us. We have collaborated with Pushkin Club tonight, and Elena is here, a representative of Pushkin Club. So I'm going to pass the microphone on just to mention that Pushkin Club and Pushkin House are different organizations which make us very interesting. So but we work together all the time, and we both date back to the mid-20th century. Anyway.
So this year, Translator and Residence at Pushkin House is actually
Katherine Young, Elena will also, Katherine Young is a winner of the translation residency, Pushkin House translation residency that we run for the second time this year. And we're happy that Katherine has managed to come all the way from the United States. We are happy to support to host this event with Anna, and also we are going to see Katherine next week on the 15th of July for a book presentation of another writer. So anyway, I'm stopped saying thank you.
Thank you very much. Добрый вечер. Thank you all very much for coming. I also would like to welcome our online audience. I would like to start by thanking Pushkin House for hosting us here tonight and providing this wonderful forum so we could discuss this important work. We would also like to thank the Arts and Humanities Research Council and particularly Professor Murian Maguire, whose grant for her project Salt Babies attracted the necessary funding. And you can find out more about the Salt Babies project on the links provided on the Pushkin House website. But it is very much a project that's exploring the maternity narrative and maternity healthcare in Russian and comparative literature. The event this evening will last for approximately 2 hours, and we will hear some extracts from the memoir, and we'll have a discussion, and of course you will be able to ask questions at the end. If you are joining us online, please tap your questions in the chat box and we will read them. I am delighted to meet and welcome these wonderful women here tonight. Anna Starobinets, the author of the memoir Look at Him, which we'll be discussing today, and you will be able to buy a copy of it at the end of the evening. And a poet and translator, Katherine Young. Thank you very much for being here. So I felt very much that the book isn't only a very personal account of loss and grief, but also an important document that sort of provides a very sobering picture of maternity healthcare in Russia and, in contrast, maternity healthcare in Europe. So I am also going to stop talking now and pass on the mic to Katherine. Thank you.
Right? Oh, okay. Thank you, Yelena. Thank you, Pushkin House. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight, both people who are here in the room and those of us who are joining us from wherever you are in the world. I think both Anna and I are a little jet-lagged, so we're going to try something new, and it's going to be like a high-wire act, and we'll see how it works. What we thought we would do is read to you a large part of the second chapter of the book, and I'll set it up before we read it. And we're going to split that chapter into 2 parts and have a little bit of discussion after each part. Maybe I should turn it to Anna. Do you want to say anything about, before we get to the reading, about...
I wanted to ask,
I wanted to ask if you have actually read the book. Okay. Then maybe I need to say something.
You may.
So none of you have read the... Okay. It's absolutely another thing. No, okay, Look at Him is my... generally, I write sci-fi. Sci-fi, horror stories, and anti-utopias for adults. Then recently, I've quite a successful project for kids, which is called A Beastly Crimes Chronicle. A Beastly Crimes Chronicle, which is a detective series. Like the action takes place in the woods. All the characters are animals. But generally it's a classical detective story with suspects, with sometimes even with murders, with thefts and so on. So this book is the only non-fiction story I've wrote, and I'm not going... When I finished it, I made a promise that it would stay the only non-fiction book. So everything that is written there is absolutely true, including the names of the doctors. And actually, it is quite a tragic story of my life. I have plenty of them. It is, well, I have two kids. My older daughter is 17. And my younger son is 7. So between them, there should have been another child, but it didn't happen because it turned out while I was pregnant that he had a disease incompatible with life, and then I had an really awful bad trip in Moscow in medical centers, trying to somehow solve that problem. And the only way which was suggested to me there was terminating that pregnancy. It was 20 weeks. And like terminating as soon as possible, because each day matters, because he may weigh 500 grams. I'm sorry, 500 grams, which would mean that he is already a human being, and if he is a human being, we need to rescue him. So all the doctors insisted on terminating that pregnancy, and I wanted to have some time to think. If I want to terminate it, maybe I want to make it to the term. And I was also hoping that maybe the diagnosis is wrong. Well, I tried to somehow discuss that question. I also wanted my husband to be involved in that discussion, which was absolutely prohibited because it turned out like it was 7 years ago now, right? It turned out that it was already quite a modern, it looked like quite a modern medical system. And when that pregnancy started, I had a doctor in a private clinic, paid him a lot of money, and everything looked and seemed very nice and European style. But then it turned out that if you have really a severe problem, you can only go to, I don't know the English equivalent for that, женская консультация. Yes, but like governmental gynecological clinic, and you only and starting from that point, you need to, like, all the rules change, everything changes, and okay, and then there is we will read a chapter out of which you maybe will understand the way the doctors talk to patients in such situations. I don't think it's only, well, my main concern was that the whole approach looked very inhuman. And I'm sure it's not only about pregnancy or like women problems. Any severe medical problems make you, if you are in Russia or in other societies, some other as well, obviously it makes you being very weak, a weak person. And in that system, if you are weak, you are not respected. And that those are two things that are directly connected. Like, you don't deserve respect. It's kind of Sparta. That's my point of view. And it doesn't matter if you lose your pregnancy or I don't know, or you have cancer or something. You shouldn't be weak. If you are weak, you are a loser. In this case, the general approach was that I should stop treating that unborn child as a child. I should imagine that it is some kind of, I don't know, unsuccessful something, like I was having flu, for instance, and now it came to the end, and in several months I will repeat that in another appropriate way. So generally, this is what the book was about. Then when the book was published, there was a great scandal in Russia about it. I had very good press on it. Many magazines and newspapers published some extracts from the book. But what I thought is that the medical community would be furious about the book, but I thought that women, for instance, or I don't know, families, would be okay with that. Actually, it was the first book on the topic. It was I kind of broke a taboo when I wrote that book, but I thought that normal readers would appreciate that I will have problems maybe with doctors, with, I don't know, with some social organizations. But it was not like that. I had some support from women, but there were lots of people who just couldn't take it. And among them, there were lots of women who lost their babies, but who wrote me, like, how dare you talk about that? We lost our babies and we were silent. And if it is like, it is normal to be a strong person. If you're a strong person, you need to be silent when you feel pain and move on. So I started arguing with them about the concept of what is actually the right approach to sorrow. Maybe it's not the right way. And another thing was that I don't know if there is an English equivalent for that, but I was accused of taking the garbage out of the house. You know that, like, so that, well, it's unpolite if I write about Russian medical system and even compare it to German medical system, because actually after that, my husband and I, we went to Germany, and we did terminate that pregnancy in Charité clinic, but in a much more human way than was proposed in Moscow. So, but it was taking garbage out of the house and showing it to the whole world. And I said, okay, are you really sure it's better to keep all the garbage in the house, that it will rotten there, maybe? So, well, it was kind of, it was a very tough discussion, but actually I don't regret, because that was the aim of writing that book. I wanted to make that topic discussable. Can I say that? So this is what the book is about.
Yeah, we're are done. So thank you, Anna. We're going to read from early in the book. The first chapter is when Anna goes, like any normal pregnancy, to the doctor at 16 weeks to have a regular 16-week ultrasound. And the ultrasound doctor, who's not a specialist, sees something that looks a little bit odd on the ultrasound, maybe something with the kidneys. He asks Anna if there are kidney problems in the family, but he doesn't know, he isn't sure, so he writes the name of a specialist on a piece of paper and gives it to Anna and says, you must go and see this specialist. And the second chapter, which is where we're going to start reading, is when she goes to see that specialist. But there is a problem. The specialist is very busy, and the lady at the clinic proposes to Anna that she see another specialist who's very, very good. He's elderly, he's a Soviet, he was a luminary of the Soviet medical world, and he can see her now. So she agrees to do that. However, she has to wait. There's one bathroom on the floor. That is a single toilet. If you're a man, or by chance a woman who's never been pregnant, perhaps you don't know that for pregnant women, the urge to urinate occurs quite often, and it's quite strong, first of all, for hormonal reasons, and second of all, because the growing uterus presses on the bladder. For that reason, standing in a line of 15 people for the single toilet is quite agonizing. I write this not because I fail to understand why there's only one toilet, although I don't understand that, but because I want to be clear about the state I find myself in when my turn for the toilet finally arrives. I'm just about to grasp the door handle when my path is blocked by a cleaning lady with a bucket and mop. She literally blocks me. She stands in the doorway and doesn't let me enter. She looks down at my feet, at my winter boots, and on her face is hatred. Why aren't you wearing shoe covers? Why am I not wearing shoe covers? I don't know. I hadn't thought about disposable shoe covers. I hadn't seen where to buy them. I didn't know. I'm sorry. You didn't know. Go to the first floor and put on some shoe covers. You can't go into the toilet without shoe covers. I understand that I won't make it to the first floor. That if now, this very second, I don't find myself in the blessed toilet, I will simply pee all over myself. I really need to use the toilet, I say to the cleaning lady. Then I'll go immediately and get shoe covers. I won't let you without shoe covers, she answers. Then I turn into an animal. I understand that I hate her. She hates me, and I hate her. We're two aggressive females. I'm no longer a medical patient, and she's not an employee. The loss of our common humanity takes place in an instant. She's the elder female. I'm the younger one. I'm obviously stronger than she is. For that reason, I simply push her out of the door of the toilet with both hands, rush inside, lock the door behind me, and answer, as they say, the call of nature. You bitch, damn you! The voice of the cleaning lady reaches me through the door. Then I do indeed go down to the first floor and buy shoe covers. And I wait for my turn. My husband phones and says he's spoken with Professor Voyevoidin's personal assistant and that she said I could go upstairs to his office and perhaps he'd see me. But I've already paid for an ultrasound with Professor Demidov, and soon my number will light up. So I stay and wait. Professor Demidov sees me after an hour. He moves the probe around my stomach and mutters, "So, the kidneys. Yes, that certainly looks like polycystic kidney disease. Or perhaps bilateral multicystic dysplastic kidney. So, the sex. It's a boy. A cephalic presentation. I want to examine the brain transvaginally. Undress to the waist." I undress. Demidov quietly converses about something with his assistant. I hear an indistinct muttering. Of course, who wouldn't be interested? Then she leaves the room. The professor inserts the transvaginal probe in my vagina. After a minute, about 15 people in white coats enter the room, escorted by the assistant, medical students, and young doctors. They line up along the walls and watch in silence, and I am lying there naked with a transvaginal probe in my private parts. Once again, I split in two. The me, who's on the edge of hysterics, screws up her eyes so as not to see them, and, it seems, weeps. The other me, observant and calm, reflects on how funny it is that the whole scene, both in feeling and setting, looks like the fragment of a nightmare. There's a common type of nightmare, for example, when you go up to the blackboard not wearing any underwear. Then he pulls out the probe and moves the transducer around my stomach to demonstrate to the students what they'd missed. Look, such a typical picture, says Professor Demidov. There are the cysts. See, there are many cysts. The size of the kidneys is 5 times larger than normal. The bladder is underdeveloped. Look, how interesting. For now, a normal amount of amniotic fluid, but soon there will be too little. Thank you. With these kinds of defects, children don't survive. They don't survive. Don't survive. Don't survive. Professor Demidov isn't addressing me, he's addressing the students. He doesn't notice me anymore. I don't exist anymore. For a short while, the calm me takes over my body entirely. I lie without underwear. Tears roll down my cheeks. These children don't survive, but all that is happening to someone else. And I'm reflecting on things. I think that purely for educational reasons, showing, quote, a typical picture to students and beginning doctors is important. That it's absolutely necessary for the education of qualified medical personnel, so they can distinguish one pathology from another, one cyst from another. And I understand that it's even better to show how a pathology looks using a live example, my example. But here's the really strange thing. If I'm now honestly serving medicine as a whole and the V.I. Kulakov Research Center for Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Perinatology in particular, why the hell did I pay 3,000 rubles for this examination? And as I'd already paid, then why didn't the luminary of science simply ask me whether I'd object to having a crowd of strangers observe me now? By the way, I'd most probably have agreed, for the same reason I'm writing this book, so that there might be just the tiniest practical benefit from what happened. The most remarkable thing is that when I describe this scene next day to my friend S, a pediatrician, he'll be sincerely surprised at my indignation. He'll say, "That's common practice. Students need to learn." And only when I remind him about the 3,000 rubles and about ethics will he appear to agree with me, but somehow without full conviction. And by the way, about common practice, is it common that the professor informing me about the fact that my baby won't survive doesn't express any regret or sympathy? I'm very sorry, but these children don't survive. That would have sounded better. Of course the professor isn't sorry. The professor has a déformation professionnelle, and he saw me probably because my case could be used for pedagogical ends. But these are all questions having to do solely with the professor and his mental makeup. Here's what has to do with common practice. The formal expression of sympathy in such situations is a norm of human relations. It's an international standard, a basic. In a few more days, I'll discover that we generally lack that kind of standard here in Russia. Sometimes I come across people who consider it necessary to say, "I'm so sorry," or "I sympathize." But that's the exception. No generally accepted rituals for expressing compassion exist. Maybe you think this isn't important, that it doesn't make things easier. Believe me, it's important. Just a very little bit, but easier. Imagine you don't have any skin, that even the wind hurts you, that you hurt yourself. Now, imagine that someone touches you. Would you prefer that hand to be wearing a canvas work glove? Or would you prefer that the person who touches you first take off the glove, wash that hand with soap, and smooth it with cream? Get dressed, the professor says, his expression slightly perplexed. Why are you sitting there? Wipe yourself off and get dressed. I discover that I really am sitting vacantly on the table, without any underwear, with gel smeared across my stomach, and looking fixedly at one spot. I wipe myself off and get dressed. The students silently observe me in the absolute silence of the grave. I break that silence. He won't live at all? Well, maybe not at all, answers the professor. Maybe he'll live a short while, 2 or 3 days, or even a month. It's up to you. Terminate the pregnancy or carry it to term. Where do I go now? Go to your local gynecological clinic. But what about here? We don't deal with those things here. This is the first time, but far from the last, that I hear the formulation, those things. But now I'm too overwhelmed to prick up my ears. Thank you, I say to the professor. It seems to me that some kind of human feeling flashes across his face, but he immediately banishes it deep. Go to the gynecological clinic, he repeats again, for some reason. I leave the room and come face to face with that same cleaning lady. She silently casts a glance at me, and an entirely sincere, somehow even childlike expression of malicious pleasure spreads over her face. I don't know how I look. Very bad, I have to think. So we'll come back later to the rest of that chapter. Do you want to read a little in Russian, Anna?
Do you want me to read a little bit in Russian? Okay. Do you want to read me? Do you want me to read starting from this moment, or the same, the part of the same extract in Russian?
We're going to read the rest of it in English eventually.
Okay, then this one. Туалет на этаже 1, то есть единственная кабинка. Если вы мужчина или, к примеру, женщина, которая никогда не была беременна, вы, возможно, не знаете, что позывы к мочеиспусканию у беременных женщин возникают очень часто, и они очень сильные. Во-первых, по гормональным причинам, а во-вторых, потому что растущая матка давит на мочевой пузырь. Поэтому стоять в очереди из 15 человек в единственную кабинку довольно мучительно. Я это все пишу даже не потому, что не понимаю, почему кабинка единственная, хотя я и не понимаю, а потому что хочу, чтобы было ясно, в каком состоянии я нахожусь, когда моя очередь в сортир наконец-то подходит. Я уже практически берусь за ручку двери, когда путь мне преграждает уборщица с ведром и шваброй. Преграждает буквально. Встает в дверном проеме и не дает мне пройти. Она смотрит вниз, на мои ноги, на мои зимние ботинки. И на лице ее ненависть. «Ты почему не в бахилах?» А почему я не в бахилах? Не знаю. Я не думала про бахилы. Я не видела, где их продают. Я не знала, извините. Не знала она. Иди на первый этаж и надень бахилы. Без бахил в туалет нельзя. Я понимаю, что до первого этажа не дойду. Что если сейчас, сию же секунду, я не окажусь в заветной кабинке, я просто описываюсь. Мне очень надо, говорю я уборщице. А потом я сразу пойду за бахилами. Без бахил не пущу, отвечает она. Тут я зверею. Я понимаю, что я ее ненавижу. Она ненавидит меня, а я ненавижу ее. Мы две агрессивные самки. Я больше не пациент медицинского центра, а она не сотрудник. Расчеловечивание происходит мгновенно. Я соизмеряю силы. Она самка старая, я молодая. Я явно сильнее ее. Поэтому я просто отталкиваю ее 2 руками от двери сортира, вбегаю внутрь, запираюсь и, наконец, отвечаю, как говорится, на зов природы. «Вот сука, чтоб тебя!» — доносится голос уборщицы из-за двери. Так-то ты принимает. И вот доктор Демидов. Он водит датчиком по моему животу и бормочет. Так, почки. Да, похоже, тут действительно поликистоз. Или, возможно, мультикистоз двусторонний. Так, пол. Это мальчик. Головное предлежание. Хочу посмотреть мозг трансвагинально. Разденьтесь до пояса. Я раздеваюсь. Демидов тихо переговаривается о чем-то со своей ассистенткой. Я слышу невнятное бормотание. Конечно, кому же не интересно. Потом она выходит из кабинета. Профессор вводит трансвагинальный датчик мне во влагалище. Спустя минуту в кабинет входит в сопровождении ассистентки человек 15 в белых халатах. Студенты-медики и молодые врачи. Они выстраиваются вдоль стены и молча смотрят. А я лежу голая, с трансвагинальным датчиком в одном месте. Я снова раздваиваюсь. Та я, которая на грани истерики, зажмуривает глаза, чтобы их не видеть, и, кажется, плачет. Другая я, наблюдательная и спокойная, размышляет, как это забавно, что вся сцена и по ощущениям, и по антуражу похожа на фрагмент кошмарного сна. Есть такой распространенный тип ночного кошмара, когда ты, например, без трусов выходишь к школьной доске. Потом он вытаскивает из меня датчик и повторно вводит по животу, специально, чтобы продемонстрировать студентам то, что они пропустили. «Смотрите, какая типичная картина», — говорит профессор Демидов. «Вот кисты. Видите? Вот они, множественные кисты. Размеры почек в 5 раз больше нормы. Мочевой пузырь недоразвит. Смотрите, как интересно. Вот пока нормальное количество, но скоро будет маловодие. С такими пороками дети не выживают. Не выживают, не выживают, не выживают». Профессор Демидов обращается не ко мне, а к студентам. Меня он больше не замечает. Меня больше нет. Спокойная я на некоторое время полностью захватывает мое тело. Я лежу без трусов, по моим щекам текут слезы. Такие дети не выживают, но это все не со мной. А я размышляю. Так, ну, размышления как про этику. Нормальная практика. «Одевайтесь», — говорит мне профессор. Вид у него слегка озадаченный. «Чего вы сидите? Вытирайтесь и одевайтесь». Я обнаруживаю, что действительно тупо сижу на кушетке, без трусов, с измазанным в геле животом, и смотрю в одну точку. Я вытираюсь и одеваюсь. Студенты молча наблюдают за мной. В абсолютной гробовой тишине. Я нарушаю эту тишину. «Он совсем нисколько не проживет?» «Ну почему нисколько?» — отвечает профессор. «Может быть, проживет 2-3 дня или даже месяц. Вам решать, прерывать беременность или донашивать. Куда мне теперь идти? Идите в женскую консультацию. А здесь? Здесь мы такими вещами не занимаемся». Это первый, но далеко не последний раз, когда я слышу формулировку про такие вещи. Но сейчас я слишком раздавлена, чтобы насторожиться. «Спасибо», — говорю я профессору. Мне кажется, на его лице мелькает какое-то человеческое чувство, но он тут же загоняет его поглубже. «Идите в женскую консультацию», — зачем-то повторяет он снова. Я выхожу из кабинета и сталкиваюсь нос к носу с той самой уборщицей. Она молча зыркает в мою сторону, и по лицу ее разливается совершенно искреннее, какое-то даже детское выражение злорадства. Не знаю, как я сейчас выгляжу. Надо думать, что очень плохо.
So one of the things that always interests me when we discuss this book, or when I discuss this book in other places, is the humor in the book. It is a book about perhaps the most terrible thing that can happen to a person, and yet there is a great deal that is maybe gallows humor, but very, very funny, including the encounter with this horrible woman who stands in the door of the bathroom with her broom and with her mop and her bucket and says, "You cannot go in to the only bathroom on a floor full of pregnant women." You said earlier that this is completely true. Did you, when you were writing the book, were you paying attention to it needs to be funny here so that people can stay with me through the hard parts?
No, of course not. It's just my way of. I mentioned here even in this text that while all that things were going on, I constantly had a feeling that I split in two parts, one of which is absolutely crushed and devastated, and another one is just observing, and sometimes it's very funny to observe. Actually, that's my way of percepting things, and it's not like when I was writing book, I was not thinking of how to make jokes. It was that humor was from the period I went through that, because all that humor is the humor of that me who observed.
Yeah, so you, obviously in what we've just heard in English and then in Russian, you don't really feel like a human being. You're kind of objectified by this group of doctors, and you're just there and they talk about you as if you're not there. Was there a point when you felt, actually, no, I have control here. I'm going to...
No, but I didn't have control, so how could how could there be that point? No, that was the problem, that I had no control. And afterwards, after that book was published, it was translated into various languages, including Spanish. And a funny thing is that Spain and all the Latin America, and in Spanish, and it was published in Spain and in Latin America, and some in many Spanish-speaking countries, and there it was bestseller for a month. Like, it was mentioned in all magazines and newspapers, like the book of the month, not among the foreign books, just the book of the month. It was sold out for several times. It was reprinted because they invited me to Spain, and there were plenty of people who wanted to discuss the book. And we came to the conclusion, me and those people in Spain, that it is the same thing, but we were on two polar, two opposite.
Polar opposites.
Huh?
Polar opposites.
Polar opposite. Polar. Yes. Because when you are in this condition in Russia, you immediately stop controlling your body in such a way, like all the doctors strongly recommend you to terminate the pregnancy. Actually, you don't have a way out. Well, you can't say no, I'm not doing that. They are not going to rape you or something, but it's impossible to have medical support then for the rest of your pregnancy. Every time you come to the doctor says, what is that actually? What is that freak inside you? Just stop it, like, you know. There is, okay, it doesn't matter. They are not going to help you. They are not going to talk about how the birth of that probably how that stillbirth will be arranged, and no one is going to let your husband in, not even to that to the birth, but just there is another episode when my husband was not. They didn't let him go to that local gynecological clinic with me because it's prohibited for men. It is 21st century Europe. It's prohibited for men to come together with their women to discuss the probable termination of the pregnancy. So you don't control your body in terms of the necessity of getting rid of some damaged, yes, some damaged material. Like you were supposed to make a good one. What did you make actually? Get rid of it immediately. We're not paying for that anyway. So this is on the one hand. On the other hand, like for Spanish women, it's the opposite situation. For instance, they wanted, because I was not sure I really wanted to get it to term. Maybe I would have terminated it anyway. I wanted just that to be my decision. And same story with them, but just the opposite. They cannot terminate. It's prohibited. Even even if, like in my case, even if that fetus is condemned, even if for him there's no chance for life, they are obliged to go through this pregnancy to the very end and deliver that probably dead baby, and they can't. For them there is no other choice, and that's why that book was also so popular. Is a bad word for such stories, but it was popular in Spanish-speaking countries because they also, for them, it's also a very, very actual and bad, story in terms of losing control over your body.
Yeah.
Sorry, we need to use the microphone in order for the audience online to hear the question.
I hate these things, so I hope you can all hear. I was just wondering, you mentioned before that you have 2 children. Did you experience those pregnancies and births in Russia?
My daughter was born in Russia, yes. We had no problems, so that went smoothly, so to say. Then after we lost that baby, when I got pregnant next time, 2 years after, it turned out that I had very high blood pressure. It was a bit dangerous for both. He was a healthy boy, but I was not healthy by that time. And it turned out that it was another story, not that bad, but still that I was ready to actually to give birth to him, but it turned out that I need to sign the documents that I only can choose between 2 clinics with cardiological ambulance. And both of those clinics, they had the rules that the husband cannot take part in that. And I tried to understand, to make sense of okay, why, if there is a danger that, for instance, I die, then maybe it's better that he's present. I said to them, I said, well, I live with that person, and if I have problems with blood pressure, I swear it's not because of him. he's a good person. Let him go together with me. That will comfort me. That probably I will feel better. They said no, we have a rules and I said, okay, damn it, my husband, he was from Latvia. So we went to Latvia. So my younger son was born in Jurmala, and that clinic had a cardiological ambulance, but they, of course, they let it was European style, so they didn't see any connection between my heart problems and my marriage, so we did that together.
Can you talk a little bit about your husband's evolution from denial to acceptance of what was happening with you? And there's a wonderful portion of the book in which you describe having a teleological argument about whether an embryo, first he started with fetus, I believe, and you said, no, you can't call it a fetus. Then can I call it an embryo? Okay, you can call it an embryo. But the question is, does an embryo have a soul? And of course, your husband was baptized in the Russian Orthodox Church, and you were not. But you were arguing that the embryo or the child had a soul. But so he started from a position of, this is a medical problem, and I will describe it as a fetus. And then he came along the journey with you.
Yeah, that's true, because, well, the general politics of the whole medical system is that and it is very archaic, by the way, is that men should not come close to all those things, all those women things. Even if it's a successful birth, better, like, maybe he will be frightened, maybe he can't see blood or something, and it is so ugly, by the way, and you should be a fairy. Fairies, they do not do such things. So probably, like, keep away from this. And if it is a dead baby, then wow, all my relatives told me, like, do you want to? Then you are losing your baby, and then your husband will divorce you. You can't let him together with you. But I thought he wanted to be with me in all this, but his attitude to that fetus or to that baby, which was the most important question actually, because before that problem was found, all the doctors in that private clinic called it baby. As soon as it turned out that he's not going to live, they started immediately calling him fetus and trying to convince me that he was not a baby anyway. He's too small for being a baby. But in the same time, they said, like, 2 more weeks and he will wait enough to be a person. So anyway, my husband, when he tried to comfort me, he said something that seemed really awful and cruel to me. He didn't mean to offend me, but he said, like, he's not a person yet, he's not a baby, it's just a collection of cells, such things. Like, he just repeated what he heard actually. And he doesn't have a soul. It was his, like, he wanted to, and I said, okay, I feel he has a soul. I feel that there is another soul inside me, although I'm not religious at all. So I tried to convince him that that we are losing a baby, and he tried to convince me that there's no baby, so we are not losing anything. But that is the general approach, but it doesn't help, because then when we came to Germany, they immediately started calling that fetus a baby, and they were insisting on him being a baby, and that it is a great loss that it's not a collection of cells, that it's a human being. And they said that they have psychological research about that if you, like, that it is you suffer when you admit that you are losing a human being, but then in future it's easier to recover if you have admitted that fact. Otherwise, you live with a big hole inside you, because you feel you lost something very important. You constantly keep convincing yourself that it was nothing. And there in Germany, after he was my husband, he was a smart, intelligent person. So after he listened to that, okay, research, okay, all the doctors say he's a baby. They showed him the ultrasound, and it was 20 weeks. Actually, well, he looked like a baby. And why the book is called "Look at Him"? Because those German doctors, and that scared me a lot. They insisted that after that baby is delivered, and he was not supposed to be alive, we need to look at him. And I said, no, please don't do that. They were not like they were not making me. They just said, okay, we have instructions, we have researchers, women who looked at those babies, then they recover sooner. And those who didn't, they suffer for years, and they are depressed, they can't move on. And I didn't want to do that, because that would, even for me, prove that it was a baby. And also I was afraid that it would, maybe it looks scary, I don't know. So I said, for the whole, like, I kept repeating, I'm not going to look at him. And my husband was saying, okay, if you don't want, you don't look. All the doctors in Germany said the same. And then after he was born, the doctors, as they promised, I closed my eyes and the doctors took him away. And then my husband, who started from saying that there was a collection of cells, said he feels very uncomfortable that we didn't look at our baby, and he went to have a look at him. So it was after that. Well, many families actually can't go through such things, and because after such things, if husbands keep thinking that there was nothing, and woman knows that she actually that there was a dead baby, they can't discuss that, and it is a great distance. A great distance between them appears, and it becomes larger and larger. And after I published that book, I had lots of letters and messages from men who wrote that they divorced their wives after baby loss, and only now they understood what those women were feeling.
I was thinking, I'm changing plans. Should we read the chapter about looking at him? About looking at the baby?
Okay.
Yeah? Okay.
If you are not frightened.
Are you frightened? It's not frightening. This is chapter 13 in the book, and it's called Seeing the Baby. At 7 in the morning, a nurse with the eyes of a fawn wakes me. Breakfast time. She places a tray of breakfast on the small table next to my bed. I surface from a dream that's heavy and black as a tombstone, and in the first seconds, I can't figure out where I am or what's happened to me. Sasha, my husband, is sleeping in the neighboring bed, snoring. The nurse fawn smiles so radiantly that it feels as if something wonderful has happened. "Do you want to see your baby?" she asks. "Well, of course I want to see my..." I even managed to smile at her before I remember. Last night, I gave birth to a dead baby at whom I didn't look. "Do you want to see your little baby?" she repeats. "Yes, I do," I answer hoarsely, and together with the words, blood gushes out, a lot of blood. "When?" "After breakfast. I don't want anything to eat." "How can that be? You don't want to eat?" The fawn opens her eyes wide in amazement. "It's breakfast. You have to eat at least something, and you also have to take this pill so you don't start lactating." Sasha wakes up. I cram toast with butter and jam into myself, coffee with milk, and the pill, so I won't produce any milk. The nurse fawn returns and invites us to follow her. And she smiles anew in such a way that it's as if they're waiting for us at the school play. I follow her, and blood flows out of me, warm and thick, like humus. Last night, it was still our shared blood, mine and my son's. Today, it's just my blood, and for me alone, it's too much. Today, I'm going to look at him, at my son, at my little baby. I'm certain that we're going to the morgue, but Fawn leads us into a comfortable room with a sofa, coffee table, and a picture on the wall, and asks us to wait just a minute. She leaves, and in a couple of minutes, she returns with a wicker basket decorated with artificial flowers. She places the basket on the coffee table right in front of me. There in the basket, surrounded by plastic flowers, covered in a light blue blanket, lies a little baby in a cap. He looks like Sasha. He has a sad and hurt face, tightly closed eyes, barely noticeable knitted brows, tiny lips pursed as if to cry out a cry that will never be uttered. a cry that I must not, cannot hear. But all the same, I hear it. I look at his unmoving face and calmly, without fear, am amazed that I hear a dead child whimpering thinly and quietly, but absolutely clearly. Of course, cry if that makes it easier, says the nurse fawn, and it suddenly dawns on me that I am making those sounds. It's me whimpering, not the dead baby in the basket. You can touch him, she says. You can hold him in your arms. Don't be afraid. It's not frightening at all. Like this. She takes my dead baby out of the basket and lays him across my knees. I touch his face lightly. It's cold. It's very cold. I stroke that cold face and howl. To the touch, his forehead feels like pastry dough that's spent the night in the refrigerator. He looks like you, I say to Sasha, our baby. It seems so, yes. Did I do the right thing in telling you to look at him? You did everything right. We sit and look at our dead son. Between us is trust, the maximum trust and closeness that's possible between people. Somewhere in another life, another world, is that stubborn, alien, frightened man who tried to convince me that it's just an embryo and an unfortunate pregnancy, like an ectopic one, and hoped to soothe me with that. This one, mine, is real, honest, and brave. He was with me all the way. There are no precise statistics, but a great number of marriages in Russia collapse after the late termination of a pregnancy. And I know why. Because husbands remain forever at the just an embryo and unfortunate pregnancy stage. Because they don't let husbands into gynecological clinics or into hospitals, or let them be present at birth, or let them look at the baby, at the dead baby, not an embryo. Administrators don't let them in because they have instructions dating back to the Inquisition, and it's plainly written there that in grief, a husband and wife mustn't be together but separate. Furthermore, that grief, for some reason, mustn't be called grief, but exclusively a, quote, fetal pathology. Doctors and nurses don't let them in because they also have instructions, and they don't give a damn about the abyss that invariably gapes open between a man who stubbornly talks about just an embryo and a woman who gives birth in torment to a dead baby with a little mouth shaped in an expression of suffering. Even women themselves don't let them in because their mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers have told them that this is God's punishment, and that it's shameful to look at such a thing or talk about such a thing, that a real man seeing such a thing or even hearing about such a thing will immediately run away. They don't let them in. They suffer. They're silent, hoping to buy God's forgiveness with that silence and hold on to that real man. But it's wrong. It's impossible to be together when such a thing is between you. Such grief, such an abyss, when you're on opposite sides of it. We haven't said much this evening about what happens after the death of the baby, and the book goes on for quite a long time, and I find this part of the journey perhaps as moving as the first part of the journey, because Anna and her husband go back to Russia to try to hold their family together and hold their marriage together, and there are no resources, there are no books, there are no support groups, there is no psychologist to consult, and there is a conspiracy of silence, even among their friends and family, to keep the topic of what happened to them from being discussed. And in fact, Anna's parents speak to their daughter, who is, I believe, 8 years old. Your daughter, right, at about 8 years old at this time, yes. Telling her, you may not ask your mother, you must not ask your mother about what happened. You should not. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a funny thing because it is the only thing you are thinking about, and you want to discuss it with people, and they try not to remind you about it, as if you could have forgotten about it. Well, actually, that's why I decided to write that book, because I found out that there is you can go nowhere with that problem. Of course, there were psychologists, and there is quite a funny chapter. I think I'm proud of it. It's really funny about my experience with psychologists when I tried to get help from them. I'm not going to repeat it. Maybe if you have the book in English or Russian, you will find it there yourself. But actually, there were no specialists in the field. Some dealt with loss, but not the loss of unborn individuals, because it's not a problem, as we know. There is no such problem, and women shouldn't go to psychologists with such a lack of problem. So finally, I decided that then, okay, I'm a writer, and although normally I write sci-fi and kids books for kids, this time it's maybe my kind of social duty to write this book, because actually every third pregnancy is a statistic. Every third pregnancy is unfortunate in a way, and if I'm not mistaken, every 10th finishes with abortion. Of course, not necessarily with kidney polycystic disease, but I may be mistaken. Maybe every 8th or every 10th is unfortunate, is a lost pregnancy. So it is. It is a. Most of women faced that problem one day, or are going to face it maybe one day. So it's mutual, but it's common. It's not something very rare. And I decided that, all right, I will make that book, because there are lots of books in English, in German, in French, and in different, not in Spanish, by the way. So that was the reason why I did it. I was crazy about having another child. So I started writing that book when I got pregnant and made that ultrasound at 16 weeks, and the doctor said that his kidneys are normal. Then, starting from that day, I began writing that book. And funny enough, with this there is a chapter actually with stillbirth, and I thought when I started it, because it was like for me time to actually to have Lev, my son, I thought that would be funny if I write this chapter about the stillbirth and then immediately give birth to my child, and that exactly happened, like this. So, and then the book finishes with the first months of Lev's childhood, and there is also another it's not translated into English. No, with doctors. Is it? See, it wasn't. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. It was not translated into Spanish.
No, it was definitely translated into English.
Thanks.
I translated it.
There is another journalistic part in the second part, because I was a journalist in my past for quite a long time, and I made some interviews with those doctors in Germany who deal with these problems. I also tried to make interviews with Russian doctors from the clinics that specialize themselves on problems with ну вот, я даже по-русски чуть не могу сообразить. Отклонения в развитии. Yes, thank you. With the fetus pathologists. but they all they said they are going to keep silence. None of them agreed to answer those questions for the book. And last thing I wanted to say, I was expecting, maybe I was even ready to go to the court because of that thing with the Dr. Demidov. It's his real second name. I used all the real names because I had no proof. I know I knew I was telling the truth, but I had no proof. And I thought in my dreams, like, okay, they call me to the court. I come there and I say, okay, call those 15 students. Maybe one of them will be brave enough to confirm what I was saying. But no one called me anywhere. The assistant of the director of that clinic called me privately on phone and said, "Wow, you wrote lies. These are lies about us in your book." I said, "Okay, what is lies?" And she said, "I'm not kidding, I swear." She said, "About the shoe covers." Have I told have I told you this? No? About the shoe cover. Bachili. I said, what? I was really very surprised. I said, what was wrong? What about the shoe covers? And she said, "Okay, you bought the shoe covers, but by the time you were you were in our clinic, like we practiced that, we sold the shoe covers, but that year where you," she said, "I looked into the document, into the archives. I saw the date where you were present with Professor Demidov, and by that time we already stopped selling shoe covers. We gave them for free on the first on the ground floor." I said, "Okay, I believe you." I was, I felt so bad that day. I don't remember really if I bought them maybe for 5 rubles, which is not a big deal, or I took them for free. I don't insist on them. Okay, I said, "Do you want me to what?" I said, any other lies in my book?" She said, "No, all the rest is okay." So I think, and I asked her if she wants the опровержение. Disclaimer, like, I also asked her, is she okay with what I wrote about Demidov, about how it all went? And she said, yes, that kind of person, but has golden hands and he's a very good doctor. He doesn't need to be a human, she said on phone. I said, okay, do you want a disclaimer? Like, I write on my social networks that, okay, clinics agrees with everything but for shoe covers. And then suddenly she said, well, no, better not. It's okay.
I just wanted to ask whether you found that, you mentioned the fact that some people in your close family circle and friends found it very difficult to acknowledge the loss. Has that changed after the book was published in Russia?
Yes, that was changed. That has changed because the you go to the shower says like Anna Starobinets' book. Look at him. You turn on radio. It is on the Everyone discussed that for a while in Moscow. Like all the newspapers had their various opinions about this book. All the Facebook was discussing that, and so why not? I mean, if everyone discusses that, then there is no reason to keep some special silence. if those people are my friends, I think that was a good thing. I somehow broke that silence.
One of the critics said it was this book is poшлость, right? Just trash, right? How do you respond to? I mean, because it clearly had such a huge impact on people and changed the tenor of discussion. I mean, she wasn't even really talking about the physical descriptions of pregnancy or going to the bathroom or anything as a pregnant woman. She was talking about the emotional content of the book. And the interesting thing is this woman said in her review that she had lost a young daughter, I think at age 3. And
Yes,
so she was
that's
specifically
true.
qualified to speak about what Poshlist the book was.
She was not just a woman. She was because this book was awarded for literary prize, national bestseller prize in Russia, and it got to the shortlist. It was one of the finalists, and that woman, she was a journalist, a literary critic, by the way, and she was in jury. And she was furious about that book getting into the shortlist because she claimed it was not literature. First of all, she had many problems with this book. Like, first, it was not literature; it's about life, meaning it's not literature. Then, second, sorrow should be silent. If it's not silent, it means it's not sorrow, and it means you don't really. It's not really. It's artificial sorrow, and you sell it for money. That was really insulted me because every literary critic in Russia knows that you get no money for your books in Russia. So why why money? Then the garbage out of the house, and the last but not the least is that she lost. It was a big tragedy in her life. She lost her 4-year-old child due to some disease. I don't remember, something.
Encephalitis or something like that.
Yes, maybe, yes, in some infection. And she said it's not, also she claimed that this grief is not real because that was not a real child. Like, my child was real, she said, because she was living for some time, until 3. And then I lost her, and still I got through that silently and proudly. She was proud of herself because she was silent. And again, it's like in Sparta, if this fox is biting you, you shouldn't cry. That means you're a strong person and you can continue doing good things in Sparta. And if you are crying or yelling or something, it means you are weak, and then Sparta doesn't need you. In my case, they didn't understand what if you are weak and you are in Russia, then maybe they will somehow of course you are disgusting if you are weak and you are crying, but they can sympathize with you in the same time. They can help you, but they do not respect you. And then if you should be silent, blah blah blah, then they will respect you. And in my case, they didn't know what to do, because on the one hand, all the book is about how I cried. On the other hand, I wrote the book after all, so it's not what a weak person does after that, which means I'm strong. And that collapsed in their heads. They didn't know what to do with me, like, am I strong or am I weak? And that was the most important question, not the question of the questions that were in the book. So yeah, there were many. Very strange. I understand everything, but I'm still surprised that women's attitude to this book was much worse than men's.
Why do you
Because
think?
for men, it's something absolutely new. They just, it's like new. They didn't know anything. Now they know everything, like Jon Snow, you know. And women, they got through that themselves. They thought about that. They suffered that, and they led their silent way. And now some bitch appears. Even the child is not ready, and she dares to suffer here out loud. I think that's the reason.
So part of what you discuss in the book, and what the second part of the book, which is these interviews with the German doctors, but also interviews with Russian women who have gone through the grief and loss process in some very interesting ways. Some of them have retreated to their faith and followed old rituals, like covering mirrors for 40 days and wearing all black for a certain specified amount of time. And these women were really making up what to do on their own, because there was not a lot of guidance, even for people who were doing it traditionally. But some of the things that you cover in that section also includes the very beginning of support groups, people who meet in online forums like Facebook for people who have lost babies. And I was wondering if you could say any more about what have people done now? What is the change that your book has made for women, women's groups, and families? Because the whole point of the book is to bring the whole family, not just the women, into the discussion of grief.
Well, yeah, thank you for this question. My main concern when I was writing that book was that no one was going to read it because the topic is unsafe, and that it's not very, funny, not funny enough. So maybe people are not going to read it. Then, when many people read it and many journalists wrote about it, my concern was that still nothing would change. But in this sense, I was lucky. In both, like, first the book became like publicly admitted, and then second, there, I don't know if you know Lida Manyava. She's in Russia there is a благотворительный фонд, charity fund for children with fatal diseases, and it's called Dom с маяком, a house with a house with lighthouse. So how to say? Okay, house with a lighthouse sounds strange, but still, this is the title, and it is very famous in Russia. So she read the book, and she also didn't know anything about this sphere. She started research there, and she went to some governmental guys in Moscow government. So finally, she made them open a special department for pregnancies like this, like mine, so that we, on the basis of her charity fund. But starting from that time, every woman in my condition, in my situation, in Moscow, unfortunately, but Russia is big, but only in Moscow, has a choice. She can go to that department, and she can have normal medical care, and she can prolong the pregnancy if she wants, and she can say goodbye to that child, look at him, and she can do it together with her husband if she wishes. If she doesn't wish, she go to gynecological clinic in the neighborhood. This is the most important that changed, and then the problems really started being published, being public, yes, and it was discussed a lot. So many private clinics changed their attitude to this. And as for this clinic that was described in the book, they finally, after they overcame that problem of shoe covers, they made special courses for doctors with the help of actors, special training of how to talk to women after she gets bad news. Because unfortunately in Russian medical institutions, in universities, there is nothing like ethics. They do not, they don't know what to say. Each one says what he thinks would be appropriate. Doctors, women most likely say, even if they are kind, even if they want to support you, they say something like, "It's okay, you will get a new one, a healthy one," or "It's okay, the bomb doesn't get into one hole 2 times." Although that's bullshit, because with this disease it can get as much as possible, because it's genetic problem. And so, and if if the doctor and men most likely they say nothing like that, Demidov, just because they feel a little bit uncomfortable and of course disgusting because those things, who would like them, and so they try to make that ethics lessons like for those elderly doctors, but it's a good start, I think.
I actually have a question myself, and it is going to be a very masculine and a very inappropriate question. You are writing horror stories and children books, and these are narratives which, you know, create effects in a way. You know, they're supposed to create this kind of, you know, inside feeling. And then you write your first non-fiction book, and you want to convey emotions, and you do not want them to, I mean, you do not want them to trivialize the trauma. So how your previous experience of writing horror story helped or like was relevant for this endeavor?
What is the final, like, I understood everything but for the last...
Yeah, basically you are writing, like, you have experience in writing horror stories in which, you know, and here you are writing a horrible story which you probably do not want for people, you know, just to read as a horror story, but, you know, have some other, like, I would say more profound understanding.
Yeah, I see. No, it's, yeah, thank you. That's what I start with is... It was a very special feeling that I am the character in my own book, like in a horror story. It is like I'm inside someone's, not maybe mine because it's not sci-fi, but still that I am inside a horror story. Well, frankly speaking, if you write books, you have professional deformation. You can't stop using everything in your books. So while I was inside that horror story, I learned something about how a person actually feels when he or she sees a monster. For me, that Demidov guy was a monster. And I felt exactly, like before that, I never met monsters, so I didn't know how you physically feel. And after that, I used that in sci-fi situations, because I know exactly what happens to you inside when you see a monster. When you see, not monster, I mean, when you think you speak to a human and it turns out that's not a human.
I was just wondering, now that you've written this book, and given that in the past you've written children's books, part of the difficulty is explaining to siblings why their little brother or their little sister didn't come home. Do you see yourself in any way, you know, writing about that and in that context so that families are able to broach the subjects within the family with their own children?
I see. No, because I'm confused about it. What I write for children is absolutely fiction. I don't think we should really say or write something special for siblings. I was advised when I was still in Germany, I had a conversation with a German psychologist, and I asked her, I was still pregnant at that moment, but I tried to imagine that I am going to have some future, so I asked her how am I supposed to talk to my daughter who is expecting to have a brother, and she said, just tell everything but for scary things, like don't frighten her. Don't tell her some ugly or scary physiological details, but tell the truth. Because if you hide something for any kid, for any person actually, but for kids, as well, it is more scary than any story you tell this kid. If you hide something, she will imagine something much worse than what you can tell her. So, and then but she said, only tell her if she asks. And that was a problem, because my mother, it turned out that my mother told her never to ask anything. So I was very surprised that she was keeping silence with all those, with everyone. And she was not, I was thinking, how on earth is it possible that she's not curious about where actually there should have been a brother, no brother, so maybe some questions about that. And then I kept waiting for her to ask. She didn't ask. And then I asked myself. I said, okay, Sasha, they both, I mean, my husband, his name was Sasha, and my daughter also, Sasha. I said, if you have some questions, I said that maybe after 2 months. I said, maybe you have some questions, then you can put them. And she said, really? I said, of course, and why not? She said, and then she told me, like, but the granny said that I can't do that. And so after that, we talked a lot about that.
I have unfortunately no online questions, but I have another question. So this book was published in English in 2020. So have you got any particular feedback in the UK?
Well, we had some discussions online, because also it was a COVID situation with there were no options to come somewhere. But generally, to my mind, it was like, in comparison with Spain, it was like people were very understanding and compassionate. But it looks like this is, for them, it is something that happens for people of the English-speaking world, is something that is not happening with them. It is happening somewhere with other kind of people. And that is true. I mean, I know there are lots of questions to medical system, for instance, in Great Britain. But that is mostly not about medical system, but about the approach, about how people talk about that. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not sure in that. That's my, well, I didn't really see any signs of recognition. That's what I mean.
So I will answer that, because it's been a huge issue. Of course, the book did come out during the pandemic, and it was very hard to do readings. We did some online. One of the things that struck me was that every single time I do a reading from this book, someone will either speak at the reading or come up to me afterwards and say, this happened to me, and it happened to me in the United States. So it's true that the medical systems are very, very different, but the fact that women feel disempowered and that they feel they're not being listened to, I think that is across the board. That's any time a woman goes into a system. And the other thing I will say is I did a number of online readings using this book with poets and short story writers who were writing about this topic in a literary way, but based on their own experience. And when I looked for complementary titles, in other words, other titles in English telling this kind of story, I didn't find many. I found, say, a movie star's memoir in which she announced, oh, I had an abortion on page 265, and that was the end. but actually discussing the loss of a pregnancy and its aftermath, there's not very much of that. And of course we see this with the loss of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's baby, and we see it with John Legend and his wife's, they lost a baby recently, and those were high profile. But the fact was there's not a lot of literature addressing the loss of an unborn child, and or the loss of an aborted child for just because the parents made that decision. So there is lots and lots of room for this conversation to expand, both in the sort of practical memoir field, but also in poetry and in short stories and in novels. We're going from here to the University of Exeter to speak at a gathering of, I'm going to speak at a gathering of women, literature from Eastern Europe on motherhood, including the loss of children. And that's a very new thing. My generation of women coming up in America, you didn't talk about wanting to be a mother, you didn't talk about being a mother, you didn't talk about maternal emotions, because if you talked about any of those things, you would not have a professional life. And so it was very much socialized into me to just leave that whole part of my life out. And consequently, although I am a poet, I don't write any poetry at all about being a mom. I am a mom, but I was taught that would be professional suicide. So there's also that stigma in the West. And I think there's not that stigma in Russia. I think for various reasons, women are much more comfortable owning the fact that motherhood is an important part of their lives in ways that my generation of American women was not.
I was interested to know, have you done any readings, either of you really, in Russia or anywhere in the world, to an audience of doctors? Or discussed it with them in this kind of format?
You mean afterwards?
Afterwards, after the book came out.
Yes, I did. I didn't initiate it wasn't my initiative. It was again doctors wrote to me, texted me, and most of them admitted that we do have this problem, and not only in terms of pregnancies, but in any case with a severe disease. There are no words for talking to patients in these situations, and then they prefer not to talk at all. Just here's your recipe. You pay there. You buy your tablets there. When you die, you go to the cemetery. And most of the doctors who addressed me thanked me. They said, it's good. I wrote that book. But for the colleagues of Professor Demidov from this book, who told me I insulted a very good person and elderly person, and I'm a bitch. And then it was a funny thing. There was his colleague on another floor. We didn't read that. Because after Demidov, I went to another ultrasound doctor who was even better, although how could you be better? And and then when I told he was really, when I told my husband about that second doctor who was young, my husband was so angry. He said, I want to go and beat him in his face. Because another doctor was just very rude to me. And I said, no, please don't do that. I will beat him with words. That's what I didn't mean the book at that moment. I thought maybe I write social networks or something. But I said I will take revenge in another way, not physically. And that's what also wrote in the beginning of this book that it's my only weapon, actually. Words is my only weapon and my only way to change things. So those doctors admitted that it was a good weapon after all. And the last thing, there is a theater play after this book, which was made by a theater director from St. Petersburg, and it is running for maybe 2 years now. And and by the way, it's very funny. Really, people laugh. It is a tragicomedy, yes, with dancing and singing. Imagine, yes, it's a buffonade, buffonada, в общем. And once, and then he told me, like, Starobinets, imagine, we are going to have a performance only for doctors, like for 100 doctors. And I said, no, you're kidding. It turned out that he was not kidding. Some medical organization of, not doctors, gynecologists, some medical organization bought tickets for gynecologists only. And imagine 100 gynecologists in the theater and those guys singing and dancing about this. And he said it was very hard because they were keeping silence the whole, the play lasts for 2 hours. And he said, no movement, he said, normally we understand what people think. We look at public and we see something on their faces. And he said that nothing, no expression, silence. And then I said, okay, but finally, did they applaud? He said, yes, they called us like 5 times back on the stage. But that's it. So no one knows what, but I hope it was helpful. to those doctor students. I don't know who they were.
Just thinking about the student medics. So there has been some change in response to your book in the established medical profession. Do you know if there's been any changes in the training for junior doctors?
For doctors in this sphere, you mean in gynecology?
I guess their specialism would be gynecology.
I'm not sure those changes were due to the book, or maybe well, but no. I wanted to say that step by step it's not actual anymore. I wanted to say that maybe slowly, but we make some changes to the best, to human rights and everything, but maybe not. All right, there were some changes. Now, what I heard that the procedure itself changed, because it's something absolutely, I'm not sure you want to hear about that. Well, the procedure that was offered to me in Russia, the procedure of terminating that pregnancy was, like when I heard that, it seemed I was in medieval times, really. It was so scary, and no one even thought that there should be, for instance, some epidural anesthesia or something. Yes. Why? Because this, and then in Germany, of course, they did all that. Because in Germany, the general attitude to this is that they need to make a patient suffer, a woman, not a patient, not generally. In this case, a woman suffers a lot morally, so she's not supposed to suffer physically. The less she suffers physically, the better. And in Russia, it somehow you keep in mind that you are doing something bad, even if if you have to, you are not guilty in that. It happened by itself, and the doctors tell you you need to terminate, and still you somehow got to such an ugly situation. It's not good. It's not, you are not a fairy. And then, of course, you should suffer. Why? Then suddenly it turns out you are killing your baby. I didn't go through that, but I wrote forums and social networks. I wrote what women wrote after they terminated that pregnancies in Russia. Then on the very final stage of that, when they are in the process of contractions, right? I'm very sorry about my English. I didn't have practice for a very long time. And when they wrote that when they had contractions, the nurses there yelled at them like, "Okay, why are you crying? Shut up, you are killing your baby." So this practice, as far as I know, changed, and now it's possible to get some anesthesia at least. And it is also more, I mean, no, we don't want to go into those details. Okay, in that method that was used before, both mother and fetus suffered a lot. And now they use another option so that both suffered a little less, physically, I mean.
Can I just say one word? Because this is turning very, very, it sounds dreadful, and why would you want to read a book about this?
Yes, and, exactly.
Well, as a translator, that's exactly, I read a review of this book, and I said, I have to have this book. I have to work on this book. It was, I don't know why. I had to work on it. But the thing about this book, the subject matter, of course, is in many ways terrible. But the book itself is beautifully written. It is just a tremendous pleasure to, probably all those years of writing horror and other books. It's paced beautifully, it moves beautifully, it reads beautifully. And in the end of the end, people ask me, how did you manage to translate that, living with the terrible, and I'm only translating it, I didn't live it, but with the terrible things that happen in this book. But I found the book to be tremendously life-affirming and even joyous. And we haven't concentrated so much on those aspects of the book here tonight, but it is a tremendously moving book, and it's the kind of book that makes you feel positive and hopeful for human beings as a species. And you wouldn't necessarily think so from the subject matter. So that's all to Anna.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. What a wonderful message to end this evening on. Does anybody have any more questions, or do we have anybody coming in on Zoom? No? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for coming. That's so important and it matters so much. Thank you so much, Anna, for the wonderful time that you've devoted to us. Thank you, Katherine. And thank you, Pushkin House.
I just wanted to mention that we are still open for another half an hour, so we do not need to rush out. So if Anna, Katherine, Elena have some time, we can all spend some time downstairs. And also we've managed to receive several copies from the publisher, exactly 6, and you can purchase them downstairs. And I'm kind of sure that you cannot buy them anywhere in the UK, except for here. So yeah, please, and thank you all for coming.
Sorry, may I add something? I also want to thank you all for coming and to thank you for having me here. By the way, I'm really very happy to be in London. It's a perfect, beautiful city. And thank you, Katherine, again for putting so much of your soul into this translation. And if you want to read this book in Russian, as far as I know, it is It is available on Litres. Litres. I think it's electronic variant of text. So, thanks.